They said her voice was gone forever, but in the heart of Central Park, a poor boy would prove them wrong. If this story touches you, don't forget to subscribe for more healing journeys like this one. Jonathan Reed had lived his entire adult life by numbers: profit margins, shareholder votes, market share. Reed Global, his empire of technology and innovation, had made him one of the most powerful men on Wall Street. But in that crisp autumn afternoon, standing in Central Park with his 7-year-old daughter Lily, Jonathan would have given away every cent for something that no amount of money could buy: his child's voice. For 3 years, silence had been her only language. Silence that had begun on a rainy night when his wife, Sarah, was taken from them in a sudden car crash on the FDR Drive. Lily had been strapped into her car seat, rescued with no physical injury. But when paramedics pulled her out, the trauma stole her words. The doctors gave the diagnosis a name: selective mutism, but their explanations could not mend the abyss in Jonathan's heart. He had taken her to the best: pediatric psychiatrists at Mount Sinai, child therapists on the Upper East Side, even specialists at Johns Hopkins. They had promised progress, sometimes a word, sometimes a whisper, but every attempt collapsed back into silence. And so, every Sunday, Jonathan walked Lily through Central Park. They would sit by the Bethesda fountain, watch the rowboats glide across the lake, feed breadcrumbs to restless pigeons. He held her hand, spoke gently, and prayed for a miracle. That afternoon, the park glowed with the golden light of late October. Leaves swirled in the breeze like tiny embers, crunching underfoot. Jonathan led Lily to the playground near Heckscher Fields, a haven for children's laughter, though his daughter never joined in. She clutched her stuffed rabbit, worn from years of mute companionship, and stood apart. Jonathan crouched beside her. "It's okay, sweetheart. You don't have to play. Just being here is enough." Her big hazel eyes looked up at him, solemn, as if she were older than her years. And then she turned toward the sandbox. A boy sat there, alone. His jeans were patched, his sneakers worn thin, but his face carried a brightness that seemed to outshine the polished swings and shiny slides around him. He built castles in the sand with fierce concentration, humming to himself, pretending each turret defended an invisible kingdom. The boy glanced up and caught Lily watching. With a smile both mischievous and kind, he waved. "Hey, want to help me build a dragon cave?" Jonathan stiffened. He had seen this before: children trying to reach Lily, only to be met with silence. He almost intervened, ready to protect her from the awkwardness. But something stopped him. Lily didn't look away. The boy patted the sand. "Come on. It's better with two." Lily's fingers tightened around her rabbit. For a moment, Jonathan thought she would retreat. But then, astonishingly, she took one small step forward, then another, until she was kneeling in the sand beside him. The boy scooped up a handful of sand and molded it. "I'm Ethan. What's your name?" Jonathan's heart ached. The question had been asked hundreds of times by well-meaning strangers, teachers, doctors. Always Lily lowered her head in silence. Always. Jonathan had to answer for her. But this time was different. Her lips parted. Her voice cracked like a forgotten instrument rediscovering its sound. "Lily." The word was fragile, trembling, but unmistakable. Jonathan froze. For a second, he thought he had imagined it, a desperate hallucination born of longing. But Ethan beamed. "Lily, that's a pretty name." Jonathan's chest tightened, his eyes stung. 3 years of silence shattered in a single syllable. He wanted to cry, to laugh, to shout for the world to hear, but he dared not break the fragile spell. Instead, he sank onto a nearby bench, hands trembling, and watched. Ethan chattered as they built towers and tunnels, his energy infectious. Lily listened, her small hands shaping sand alongside his. She didn't speak again, not yet, but her face glowed with a brightness Jonathan hadn't seen since Sarah's funeral. An hour passed like a heartbeat. The park dimmed as the sun tilted westward. Jonathan finally stood, his voice low and thick. "Lily, sweetheart, it's time to go." She looked up, hesitated, then glanced at Ethan. He gave a small nod, as if granting her permission. She rose, brushed the sand from her dress, and walked to Jonathan's side. As they left, Jonathan turned back. "Thank you, Ethan." The boy shrugged. "We're just playing." But Jonathan knew it was more than play. It was a miracle that medicine and money had failed to deliver. They walked home along Fifth Avenue, the city alive with honking taxis and glowing storefronts. Lily clutched his hand tighter than usual. Jonathan's thoughts raced. Who was that boy? Why had his daughter spoken to him when every expert had failed? When they reached their apartment overlooking Central Park South, Jonathan tucked Lily into bed. She curled against her rabbit, whispering a soundless goodnight with her eyes. He kissed her forehead, then stepped out into the dimly lit living room. For the first time in years, hope flickered. Jonathan poured a glass of scotch but barely touched it. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, gazing at the city lights. Somewhere in the Bronx, in a neighborhood worlds apart from his penthouse, lived a boy who had unlocked his daughter's voice. And Jonathan Reed, the man who had conquered Wall Street, found himself humbled by the simplest truth. The healing of his child lay not in power or wealth, but in the heart of a child he barely knew. The night deepened, and he whispered to the glass, "Why him? Why now?" The silence, for once, did not crush him. It filled him with questions, and with the faintest sound of possibility. The following Saturday, Jonathan Reed found himself behind the wheel of his black Lincoln Navigator, inching through traffic along the Bronx River Parkway. He had spent the entire week replaying one single word in his mind: Lily. Spoken not by him, not by a doctor coaxing, not in whispered memory, but by his daughter herself. It had been fragile, uncertain, yet real, and the boy, Ethan Morales, was the catalyst. Jonathan had not been able to shake the image of Ethan's bright face, nor the warmth in his voice when he spoke to Lily as though she had never been broken. The boy had reached his daughter where armies of specialists had failed. Jonathan needed to know more. Beside him, Lily sat in her booster seat, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Her hazel eyes looked out the window, watching the blur of graffiti-streaked walls, small bodegas, and sagging fire escapes that lined the Bronx. Her silence today felt different. Not a wall, but a pause between breaths. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Jonathan asked softly, glancing at her through the rearview mirror. Lily nodded. Just the faint dip of her chin, but it carried more conviction than most words. Jonathan's chest tightened. "All right, sweetheart." The GPS directed him toward Maple Avenue, a name that carried little of the leafy charm its word implied. As the car rolled deeper into the neighborhood, Jonathan felt the city shift. The luxury boutiques of Manhattan and the gleaming towers of Midtown seemed like another planet. Here, sidewalks cracked beneath weary sneakers, and the air carried the tang of exhaust and fried food drifting from street vendors. Children played stickball in alleys, their laughter layered over the distant wail of a siren. A man in a stained undershirt sat on the stoop, cigarette dangling, watching without expression. The buildings stood tired and scarred, bricks darkened by years of neglect, windows patched with cardboard. "Is this where Ethan lives?" Jonathan murmured, more to himself than to Lily. She nodded again, her small hands gripping the rabbit tighter. Jonathan parked near a sagging complex of apartments, their iron railings rusted, graffiti curling across the walls like angry vines. He felt a pang of disorientation. He had closed deals worth billions in skyscrapers of steel and glass. But here, in the Bronx, he felt strangely unprepared, as though his suit and leather shoes were armor too fragile for this battlefield. "Stay close to me," he said gently, taking Lily's hand as they stepped out. The air was cooler here, damp from last night's rain. They approached the building, where two teenagers lounged near the entrance, their hoodies pulled low. Jonathan felt their eyes sweep over him, a stranger, a wealthy outsider. He straightened unconsciously, then reminded himself that he was here not as CEO Reed, but as Lily's father. The door buzzed open before he could knock. A woman emerged, hair pulled back into a hurried ponytail, wearing scrubs beneath a faded coat. She looked younger than she must have been, her face tired but striking. Her brown eyes widened when she saw Jonathan. "Can I help you?" she asked, guarded. Jonathan extended a hand. "I'm Jonathan Reed. I believe you're Ethan's mother?" She glanced at his expensive watch, the tailored coat, then back at Lily. A flicker of recognition crossed her face. "Isabel Morales. Yes. Ethan mentioned you. You're the father of the girl from Central Park." "That's right." Jonathan's voice softened. "Lily hasn't stopped asking about Ethan. I thought it only right to bring her by." At the mention of his name, Ethan burst into the hallway, his jeans still dusty from play, hair tousled. "Lily!" he exclaimed, his grin wide. Lily's hand twitched in Jonathan's grasp. She hesitated, then let go, walking the few steps toward Ethan. They stood facing each other, silent for a beat, and then both burst into laughter. A sound so rare from Lily that Jonathan's throat tightened. "Come in," Isabel said, opening the door wider. "It's not much, but—" The apartment was dim, the wallpaper peeling, the ceiling water-stained. A single bulb flickered above the kitchen sink. The air smelled faintly of detergent and fried rice. Yet despite the disrepair, everything was neatly kept. Dishes washed, books stacked in careful piles, toys arranged in order. Jonathan lowered himself onto a worn couch, springs creaking under his weight. Lily and Ethan raced to the corner, pulling out a stack of picture books. Ethan began reading aloud with dramatic voices, holding up the pages for Lily. She giggled, hiding her face behind the rabbit, her voice bubbling in tiny whispers Jonathan could barely catch. Isabel slipped off her coat, folding it with care. She poured water into 2 glasses and set them on the chipped coffee table. "You didn't have to come all this way," she said, sitting opposite Jonathan. Her tone was polite but wary. "I wanted to thank you," Jonathan replied. "Your son, he gave me something I thought I'd lost forever." Isabel's eyes softened, but only for a moment. "Ethan's a good boy, too good for the world he's in." Jonathan studied her. There was resilience in her posture, the kind born of carrying burdens too heavy, too long. He remembered the file his assistant had pulled. Isabel Morales, 28 years old, single mother, once a student at Bronx Community College in nursing, now juggling night shifts at Lincoln Hospital and cleaning jobs to keep afloat. "You're a nurse?" Jonathan asked. "Almost." She looked down at her hands. "I had to drop out when Ethan was born. Life doesn't exactly wait for degrees." Her honesty struck him. In his world, people dressed lies in silk and called it negotiation. Here, truth was raw and unapologetic. A sudden knock rattled the door. Isabel frowned, rising quickly. An older man stood there, wearing a heavy jacket, a clipboard in his hand. "Rent!" he barked. "You're 2 months behind, Morales. I need payment by the end of the week, or you're out." Jonathan felt the words like a punch. He glanced at Isabel, saw the flush rise in her cheeks, the tremor she tried to hide. "I'll have it," she said quietly. "Just give me until Friday." The man grunted, scribbled something, and left. Jonathan sat frozen. The CEO in him, trained to solve problems with money, wanted to pull out his checkbook, erase the debt in a heartbeat. But when he reached for his pocket, Isabel's sharp gaze stopped him. "Don't," she said firmly. "I don't need charity." Her pride was not arrogance, it was survival, and Jonathan, for the first time in years, had no ready answer. Meanwhile, Lily leaned against Ethan, her head resting on his shoulder. She whispered something into his ear, too soft for Jonathan to hear, but it made the boy laugh, his voice filling the room like sunlight breaking through clouds. Jonathan swallowed hard. For 3 years, his daughter had lived in shadows. Now, in this crumbling apartment, she found laughter, companionship, even fragments of speech. When the sun began to sink, he rose reluctantly. "We should be going, Lily." Her face fell, but she slipped her hand into his. "Can Ethan come?" she whispered, her voice carrying across the room. Jonathan's breath caught. A full sentence. Her first in years. He looked at Isabel. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the gulf between penthouse and tenement, wealth and poverty, seemed to vanish. "I'll think about it," Jonathan said gently. His voice steady though his heart raced. As they left, he glanced back at the small apartment, at Isabel's tired but unyielding figure, at Ethan waving from the doorway. In the Navigator, Lily leaned against him, her smile soft and serene. Jonathan's mind churned. He had just witnessed his daughter laugh, whisper, even speak, all because of a boy from Maple Avenue. He had spent his life building towers of glass and steel, commanding armies of employees, chasing profits across continents. But now, for the first time, he realized the greatest battle was for the soul of a child, and the allies he needed were not investors or executives, but a boy with patched jeans and a mother who refused to bow to pity. The skyline of Manhattan reappeared as they drove south. The city glittered, alive with ambition. Yet Jonathan felt his priorities shifting. Beside him, Lily whispered, almost inaudible, "Daddy, happy." Tears blurred his vision. He kept driving, his grip tightening on the wheel. His heart pulled between two worlds, the empire he had built and the fragile miracle only a poor boy from the Bronx could give him. The following week, Jonathan Reed found himself standing before a building he had never thought he would enter, the Bronx Public Library, a weathered structure tucked between a shuttered laundromat and a corner bodega on East 173rd Street. It wasn't the grand marble halls of the New York Public Library on Fifth Avenue, the one his daughter had once toddled through with Sarah, marveling at the lions outside. No, this library was smaller, its bricks dulled with soot, its windows smudged with fingerprints of countless children. Yet as Jonathan pushed the door open, a warmth greeted him. Not the warmth of climate control, but the hum of voices, the energy of life. Lily clung to his hand, her stuffed rabbit tucked beneath her arm. She had spoken a handful of words that week, but everyone felt like treasure. Jonathan had replayed her quiet sentence, "Can Ethan come?" 1,000 times, as though it were a symphony. Inside, the library smelled of old paper and floor polish. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. A few adults sat at computers, their screens glowing with job applications and resumes. But it was the children's section that drew Lily forward. Her eyes lit up, and Jonathan followed, his heart quickening. And there he was, Ethan Morales, standing on a low stool, book in hand, reading aloud to a small group of children sprawled on a rainbow rug. His voice rose and fell with drama, painting dragons and castles in the air. The children gasped and giggled, hanging on his every word. Jonathan stopped short. The boy read not as a child, but as a storyteller, his cadence alive with imagination. He wasn't just sounding out words. He was giving them breath, turning ink into magic. "And the dragon," Ethan intoned, his voice dropping into a growl. Wasn't mean at all. He was just lonely. The children laughed, clapped, begged for more. And then Jonathan saw it. Lily stepping forward, eyes wide, lips trembling. She stared at Ethan, at the page he held open. Her small voice broke the air. The dragon was just lonely. The words rang like a bell. Jonathan's knees nearly buckled. His daughter had strung together a full, clear sentence, her first in years. Ethan's eyes widened. He grinned, radiant. That's right, Lily. Want to help me read the next page? She nodded eagerly. For the next 15 minutes, the two children bent over the book together. Ethan read, then paused, and Lily repeated in fragments, sometimes a word, sometimes two. Her voice wavered but grew steadier with each attempt. Jonathan sat heavily in a chair, his throat tight, watching as his daughter found her way back to language in the company of a boy from a crumbling apartment in the Bronx. Isabel appeared then, slipping in from her shift at Lincoln Hospital, still in scrubs. Her face lit with surprise at the sight of Lily reading aloud. She lowered herself into the chair beside Jonathan. She's talking, she whispered, her voice choked with awe. Jonathan nodded, unable to speak. For a few minutes, they sat in silence, not the suffocating silence that had haunted Jonathan for years, but a shared reverence for the fragile miracle unfolding before them. When the story ended, the children dispersed. Ethan hopped off the stool, triumphant. See? I told you dragons are never really bad. Lily laughed, an unguarded musical sound. Jonathan had not heard it since Sarah's funeral, but the fragile peace shattered when a sharp knock rattled the glass doors of the library. A man in a leather jacket entered, carrying a folded sheet of paper. He walked directly toward Isabel, her face drained of color. She took the paper with trembling hands, eyes scanning the lines. Jonathan leaned forward. What is it? Isabel swallowed. It's a notice. Eviction. Jonathan's stomach dropped. Eviction? She nodded, folding the paper with shaking fingers. 2 months behind on rent. I begged for more time, but they're done waiting. We have until the end of the week. Jonathan stared at her, then at Ethan, who now clutched his mother's arm, sensing the tension. Lily stood beside them, her rabbit dangling from her hand, her eyes clouded with fear. He wanted to shout, to pull out his checkbook, to fix this in the only way he knew. Money had always been the weapon with which he conquered obstacles. But Isabel's voice cut through his instinct. I don't need your charity, Mr. Reed, she said sharply, her eyes flashing. I can fight my own battles. Jonathan stiffened. This isn't charity, it's pity, she interrupted. And I won't take it. Her pride was steel, forged in hardship. Jonathan felt the sting, but beneath it, respect. She wasn't asking for rescue. She was asking for dignity. The children looked between them, their small faces tight with worry. Jonathan exhaled, softening. All right, he said quietly. No checks. But let me help in another way. Her eyes narrowed. What do you mean? I don't know yet, Jonathan admitted. But I promise you this. Lily needs Ethan. And from what I see, Ethan needs Lily too. I won't let either of them lose that. Isabel's shoulders sagged, just slightly. For the first time, he saw exhaustion crack through her armor. The library staff flicked the lights, signaling closing time. Isabel rose, gathering her things. Ethan hugged Lily goodbye. I'll see you soon, okay? Lily whispered. Soon. It was a promise, fragile, but real. Outside, the Bronx streets buzzed with life, sirens shouting, music from passing cars. Jonathan walked them to their building, watching as Isabel guided Ethan up the dim stairwell. He felt the weight of her defiance, her exhaustion, her quiet bravery. As he drove back toward Manhattan, Lily asleep in the back seat, Jonathan's mind churned. He had seen the eviction notice with his own eyes. If Isabel and Ethan lost their home, Lily would lose the one person who could unlock her voice. And Jonathan Reed, CEO of Reed Global, was not a man who lost. But this time the stakes were not stock prices or boardroom votes. They were the fragile words of his daughter, the laughter of a boy, the dignity of a mother fighting to survive. For once, his wealth and power felt useless. For once, he would have to learn another way to fight. That night, in his penthouse overlooking Central Park, Jonathan stood at Sarah's portrait, her smile frozen in time. He whispered into the silence, "She's speaking again. Because of him. Because of them. What am I supposed to do now?" The silence offered no answer. But deep inside, Jonathan knew this was no longer about his empire. This was about building something money could never buy, a chance for his daughter to live again. And perhaps, just perhaps, a chance for him too. Jonathan Reed sat in his office on the 40th floor of Reed Global's glass tower in Midtown Manhattan, staring at the city skyline. From this height, the world looked orderly. Taxis flowed like yellow streams, pedestrians crossed avenues in choreographed lines, and skyscrapers rose like monuments to certainty. Yet inside his chest, there was nothing but disorder. 3 weeks had passed since that afternoon in the Bronx Public Library. 3 weeks since he had heard his daughter string together a full sentence. 3 weeks since he had seen Isabel Morales stand tall, eviction notice clutched in her hand, refusing the money he had almost thrown at her. He had not been able to forget her words. "I don't need pity. I need a chance." For most of his career, money had been the answer. A lawsuit? Settle it. A competitor? Acquire it. A scandal? Pay a PR firm to bury it. But Isabel was the first person in years to look him in the eye and reject the only language he knew. Jonathan rubbed his temples. The office was silent but for the faint hum of the HVAC system. His desk was immaculate. 2 Mont Blanc pens, a framed picture of Sarah holding a baby Lily, and the day's Wall Street Journal folded open to the financial section. His board chairman, Richard Blackwell, had scrawled a note in the margin of an article on biotech stocks. "Meeting, Friday. Bring answers." Jonathan closed the paper. His board could wait. For now, his mind was on a woman who lived in a water-stained apartment in the Bronx and a boy who had given his daughter her voice. He tapped the intercom. "Emily, could you pull everything you can find on Isabel Morales?" His assistant hesitated. "Sir? Education, employment history, anything." "Yes, Mr. Reed." An hour later, a slim file appeared on his desk. Jonathan opened it carefully. Isabel Morales, age 28. Bronx-born. Attended Bronx Community College, nursing program. Withdrew after second year due to pregnancy. Multiple part-time jobs since, cashier, night aide at Lincoln Hospital, cleaning shifts. No criminal record. No debt outside overdue rent. Jonathan leaned back. Nursing. That explained the quiet competence in her eyes, the way she had steadied Ethan with a single touch. She was someone who had once dreamed of healing others, but life had interrupted her dream. He pulled a checkbook from his drawer. His hand hovered over the page. He could fix this in seconds. $5,000 would cover her rent, tuition, food, everything. But his pen froze. He remembered the fire in her voice. "I don't need charity." He closed the checkbook. He needed another way. The door opened. Richard Blackwell strode in without knocking. his silver hair gleaming, his Armani suit immaculate. He carried with him the scent of expensive cigars and sharper ambition. "Jonathan," Richard said smoothly, dropping into a chair, "you've been distracted." Jonathan arched a brow. "I wasn't aware my calendar was public." Richard smirked. "Your stock price is. Investors can smell when a CEO's mind is elsewhere. What's on your plate?" Jonathan hesitated. He had known Richard since their Harvard days. Richard was ruthless, pragmatic, and never wrong about market dynamics. But he was also incapable of understanding anything that didn't fit neatly into a balance sheet. "I'm considering a new program," Jonathan said carefully. "Corporate wellness, support for employees' families, health care, education stipends." Richard barked a laugh. "Wellness? Jonathan, this is Reed Global, not a charity foundation. Shareholders don't pay you to hand out tuition money." "It's not charity," Jonathan said, his jaw tightening. "It's investment. Happier employees mean better performance, lower turnover." Richard leaned forward. "Don't spin me. This isn't about employees. This is about some woman you've met, isn't it?" Jonathan froze. Richard had always been able to read him too well. "You've gone soft," Richard said, shaking his head. "I warned you, grief does strange things to men, but we're 2 years out from Sarah's death. If you want to keep this company intact, you'd better remember your duty is to the board, not to some single mother in the Bronx." The words hit like ice. Jonathan gripped the arm of his chair, forcing calm. "Leave my family out of this." Richard smirked again, rising. "Then prove me wrong. Keep your distance. No one wants to read about Reed Global's CEO moonlighting as a social worker." When he left, silence fell heavy. Jonathan turned back to the file on Isabel. Her life story lay between the pages, potential cut short, resilience unbroken. He thought of Ethan's voice weaving through library shelves, of Lily's laughter beside him. He couldn't ignore it. Not for Richard, not for the board. That evening, Jonathan drove uptown. He found Isabel outside Lincoln Hospital, tying her coat tighter against the wind after a 12-hour shift. Her face was pale with fatigue, but her steps remained steady. She saw him and frowned. "Mr. Reed, what are you doing here?" "Call me Jonathan," he said quietly. "I don't have time for small talk. I need to get home." He walked beside her. "I looked into your history. Nursing. You were on track to finish." Her head snapped toward him. "You had no right." "I had every right," he interrupted, then softened his voice. "Because my daughter's life is tied to your son's, and your son's stability is tied to you." Her eyes narrowed, defensive. Jonathan reached into his coat and handed her an envelope. She recoiled as if it burned. "I told you." "It's not money," he said firmly. Slowly, she opened it. Inside was a letter printed on Reed Global letterhead. "Corporate Wellness Pilot Program," she read aloud, confused. "Full-time position," Jonathan explained. "Health benefits, tuition support, flexible hours to accommodate school. You'll be working with our employee health initiatives." Her lips parted. "Why me?" "Because you deserve a chance, not pity. A chance." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the rumble of buses pulling into the curb. Finally, she looked down. "And if I say no?" "Then you'll keep fighting the same battles alone," Jonathan said, "and I'll keep watching my daughter lose the one friend who makes her laugh." Her eyes glistened. For the first time, her walls cracked. "I don't want a savior," she whispered. "Neither do I," Jonathan said softly. "I want a partner. Someone who understands that healing isn't always about medicine or machines. Sometimes it's about people." For a long moment, Isabel studied him. Then, with a reluctant nod, she tucked the letter into her bag. "I'll think about it." That night, Jonathan returned to his penthouse. Lily was already asleep, her rabbit tucked under her chin. He sat beside her bed, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "You'll see Ethan soon," he whispered. Her lips curved in the faintest smile, and Jonathan felt something inside him ease. In his study, he poured a glass of scotch and stared at the skyline. Richard Blackwell's warning echoed in his mind, but he no longer cared. For the first time since Sarah's death, he felt as though he were moving towards something that mattered. Not a merger, not a profit margin, but a chance at life. Fragile, human, real. And for Jonathan Reed, the dilemma was no longer whether to risk his career. The dilemma was whether he could afford not to. The announcement went out on a gray Monday morning. Printed in bold across Reed Global's internal bulletin, "New Initiative, Corporate Wellness Pilot Program, Supporting Employee Health and Education." It was standard corporate wording, dry enough to blend with the hum of quarterly updates and policy memos. But for Jonathan Reed, it represented something radical. It was not about shareholder value, it was about people, about Isabel Morales, her son Ethan, and by extension his daughter Lily. The program promised subsidized health care, tuition support for employees who wish to continue higher education, and flexible scheduling for single parents. On paper, it sounded progressive. In practice, it was designed with Isabel in mind. Jonathan sat in the boardroom as the executive team reviewed the rollout. The walls of glass framed Manhattan's skyline like a living painting. His COO, Ethan Caldwell, adjusted his tie and spoke with thinly veiled skepticism. "Jonathan, this program isn't cheap," Caldwell said. "Our projections put the cost north of $5 million over 2 years. What's the ROI?" Jonathan leaned back, his face calm but firm. "The return is loyalty, retention, stronger families. A healthier workforce doesn't just clock in, it thrives. That's ROI." Caldwell smirked. "Since when did Reed Global become a social work agency?" Richard Blackwell, seated at the far end, said nothing. He only tapped his pen against the mahogany table, his eyes sharp, assessing. Jonathan felt the weight of that gaze but refused to yield. The program launched quietly. Isabel received her onboarding packet with disbelief in her eyes. A new badge with the Reed Global logo hung from her neck as she entered the building for her first day. Jonathan happened to be in the lobby that morning. He watched from a respectful distance as Isabel walked past the marble floors, dressed neatly though simply, her hair pulled back, her son at her side. Ethan clutched a library book, eyes wide at the towering atrium. "Mom," Ethan whispered, "it's like a castle." Isabel smiled faintly. "It's just a job, mijo." But Jonathan saw the way her hand trembled slightly when she swiped her badge at the security turnstile. For her, it wasn't just a job, it was a lifeline. In the days that followed, Isabel adapted quickly. She joined the wellness division, coordinating fitness classes, organizing medical checkups, and managing paperwork for employee tuition grants. Her nursing background gave her an edge. She spoke with clarity, authority, and, most importantly, compassion. Co-workers noticed. They also whispered. "She's new, right?" one manager murmured by the coffee machine. "Funny how she landed this spot. Heard the CEO himself recruited her." "Must be nice," another replied. "Some of us spent 10 years climbing the ladder." The rumors spread like ink in water. The Wall Street Journal had not yet sniffed it out, but whispers had a way of growing teeth. Jonathan pretended not to hear. He buried himself in meetings, but he also checked in on Isabel more than he should have. Passing glances became short conversations. Short conversations stretched into discussions that lingered in his thoughts long after. One evening, as the office emptied, he found her sorting files in a quiet conference room. "You're working late," he said. She glanced up, wary. "So are you." Jonathan smiled faintly. "Touché." He stepped inside, lowering his voice. "How's it going?" "Busy," she replied. "But I like it. It's different. For once, I'm not just patching holes. I'm building something." Her words struck him. Building something. That was what he had done his entire career, though he had built in steel and code while she built in people. "You belong here," he said. She blinked, caught off guard. Then her lips curved into a small smile, the kind that revealed both gratitude and suspicion. "Maybe. For now." But outside that quiet room, the world was less kind. By the end of the week, an anonymous blog post appeared online. "Reed Global's CEO and his Bronx prodigy, nepotism or compassion?" The article was speculative, citing sources that claimed Isabel Morales had been handpicked for her job due to special ties to Jonathan Reed. By morning, the article had been shared across finance forums, LinkedIn feeds, and even Twitter. The comments were merciless. "Classic case of sleeping your way into the C-suite. So much for meritocracy. If you're a single mom, apparently Reed Global is hiring." Jonathan read the comments with a sick twist in his stomach. Isabel didn't deserve this. He had underestimated how fast the world pounced on vulnerability. When he arrived at the office that day, he found Isabel already there, her face pale, her hands trembling as she typed at her desk. "Isabel," he said quietly, drawing her aside into a private office. "I saw the article." Her eyes flashed. "So it's true then? Everyone thinks I'm just your charity case." "You're not," Jonathan said firmly. "You've earned your place here." Her voice broke. "You don't understand. I worked my whole life to prove I'm more than the girl from Maple Avenue. Now all they see is some CEO's project." Jonathan's chest tightened. He wanted to shield her, to silence the world's cruelty. But he also knew shielding her would only wound her pride further. "You're right," he admitted softly. "I don't understand what it's like to fight from where you've come. But I do know this. You've already proven more than any headline can erase. The work you do matters. To this company. To me. To Lily." At the mention of Lily, Isabel's expression softened. She exhaled slowly, gathering herself. "Then I'll keep working. Let them talk. I don't have time to waste on whispers." But Jonathan knew whispers could grow into storms. That evening, he tucked Lily into bed at their penthouse. She whispered a new word that made his heart stutter. "Tomorrow." "Tomorrow what?" he asked. "Tomorrow, Ethan," she murmured, clutching her rabbit. Jonathan smiled through the ache in his chest. His daughter was learning hope again, one word at a time. And tomorrow mattered because of Ethan, because of Isabel, because of the fragile bridge that bound their lives together. He returned to his study, the city lights sprawling beneath him. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Richard Blackwell. "Rumors are out. This better not reach the Journal. Fix it, Jonathan. Fast." Jonathan set the phone down, staring at the skyline. He had built an empire by controlling narratives, crushing rivals, keeping order. But this was no longer a clean equation. For the first time, Jonathan Reed realized that in saving Isabel and Ethan, he might be risking everything: his reputation, his company, his carefully guarded legacy. And yet, as he thought of Lily whispering tomorrow, he knew one thing with absolute clarity. Some risks were worth it. It was a sunny Thursday afternoon when Jonathan Reed found himself standing outside PS 87 William T. Sherman School, one of Manhattan's most sought-after public schools. Parents in tailored coats and polished shoes gathered near the wrought iron gates, chatting about violin lessons, ski trips, and summer language camps in France. Their voices carried the effortless confidence of wealth, the kind of confidence Jonathan himself had worn for decades. But today, that world felt hostile. He was there not as CEO of Reed Global, but as the father of Lily Reed, the little girl who had finally begun to speak again. Lily had started attending PS 87 just 2 months earlier. Jonathan had insisted on it. He wanted her surrounded by good teachers, in an environment where she could rebuild her voice step by fragile step. What he hadn't anticipated was the cruelty of children, or the sharper cruelty of parents. That morning, Lily had insisted on bringing Ethan Morales with her. Isabel had agreed hesitantly, trusting Jonathan's promise that Ethan would be safe there for the day. Ethan had been ecstatic, stuffing his worn backpack with 2 books and a sandwich wrapped in foil. Now Jonathan watched from a distance as the children spilled out onto the playground after lunch. He kept his gaze fixed on Lily. She wore her red jacket, rabbit tucked in her backpack, her hair pulled into a loose braid. For once, she walked not on the margins, but beside Ethan. Ethan's laugh carried across the asphalt. He was animated, pointing at a patch of clouds shaped like dragons. Lily giggled, her small voice audible even from where Jonathan stood. It was a fragile miracle, but miracles are fragile because they are easy to break. Near the swings, a group of boys watched. Their clothes were spotless, sneakers brand new. One of them, tall for his age, with the self-importance of a child who had never known want, curled his lip. "Hey, Reed!" he shouted, his voice sharp. "Why are you hanging out with trash from the Bronx?" The playground went still. Lily froze. Ethan's shoulders tensed, but he kept his head down. He had heard it before, Jonathan realized, far too many times. The boy sneered. "Bet his mom cleans toilets. Probably why you're friends with him, huh? Can't get anyone better?" Jonathan's blood ran cold. He took a step forward, every instinct screaming to intervene. But before he could, Lily moved. She marched up to the boy, her small fists clenched. For a moment she was trembling, but her voice rang out, clear, strong, furious. "He gave me back my voice!" The words shattered the air. Every child, every teacher, even the parents near the gate turned toward her. The boy blinked, stunned. "What?" But Lily didn't stop. Tears welled in her eyes, but her voice didn't break. "I couldn't talk for 3 years. Not one word. Doctors couldn't help me. Teachers couldn't help me. My dad couldn't help me. He did. Ethan did. So don't you dare call him trash." Silence. The playground seemed to hold its breath. Then, in one swift motion, Lily shoved the boy's shoulder. He stumbled backward, landing hard on the asphalt. Gasps rose from the watching crowd. Jonathan's heart lurched. He was already moving, pushing past a knot of shocked parents, reaching Lily just as a teacher rushed in. "Mr. Reed, what on earth?" the teacher began, but her voice was drowned out by the boy's mother. A tall woman in pearls and a Burberry coat stormed forward. Her son scrambled to his feet, his face red with both humiliation and rage. "Did you see that?" the woman shrieked. "That little girl assaulted my son!" Jonathan pulled Lily into his arms, her body trembling against him. "Enough," he said sharply. "Enough?" The woman's eyes blazed. "Your daughter is out of control. And who even is that boy?" She jabbed a finger toward Ethan, who stood frozen, eyes wide with shame. "I'll tell you who. He's from the Bronx. Everyone knows his kind. And you—" She whirled on Jonathan. "You bring him here? What sort of example is this?" Jonathan straightened, his voice steel. "That boy saved my daughter's life." The woman scoffed. "Don't be ridiculous." "I'm not," Jonathan said, his voice rising. For 3 years, Lily couldn't speak. Not to me. Not to anyone. And in one afternoon, Ethan Morales gave her back her voice. He did what your doctors, your private tutors, your expensive therapies couldn't do. And if you or anyone else dares call him trash again, you'll answer to me. The crowd was silent. Parents shifted uncomfortably. Teachers exchanged looks. Some were scandalized, others quietly moved. But Jonathan could see it. The story was already writing itself in their minds. CEO Jonathan Reed, the whispers would say, caught defending a single mother and her son in public, bringing Bronx kids into Manhattan's elite schools. It was only a matter of time before it reached the boardroom, the media. The principal hurried forward, trying to smooth the tension. "Mr. Reed, perhaps we should discuss this inside." But Jonathan shook his head. "Not now. My daughter is going home." He guided Lily away, Ethan trailing silently behind. Isabel met them at the gate, her face pale with alarm. "What happened?" she demanded. Jonathan's jaw clenched. "Ask Lily." Isabel looked down at the girl who still clutched her rabbit. Lily's voice cracked but held. "They called Ethan trash." "I told them he gave me my voice." Tears filled Isabel's eyes. She pulled her son close, whispering in Spanish, "Eres mi orgullo, mijo." "You are my pride." Jonathan's chest burned with both fury and dread. He knew what would come next. Whispers turned to rumors, rumors turned to headlines, and in the world he inhabited, perception could destroy as swiftly as truth could heal. That night, the first email arrived from his communications director. Subject, urgent. Potential PR issue attached was a draft article from a parenting blog, already gaining traction. Reed Global CEO defends troubled Bronx boy after playground altercation. Jonathan read the lines with a grim jaw. It was beginning. He closed the laptop, walked into Lily's room, and sat by her bed. She was already asleep, her face peaceful, her hand resting on her rabbit. For the first time, he realized the true cost of healing. It was never neat, never safe. To fight for his daughter's voice, he would have to risk his own. And as he sat in the dim light, watching her breathe, Jonathan whispered to the silence, "Let them come. For her, I'll fight them all." By Monday morning, the storm had arrived. Jonathan Reed stood at the window of his corner office on the 40th floor of Reed Global, watching the city churn below. But it wasn't the taxis or the pedestrians that made his stomach clench. It was the screens flashing inside every trading floor across Manhattan. Reed Global down 5% in early trading. The headlines scrolled relentlessly across Bloomberg terminals and CNBC broadcasts. CEO Reed at center of playground scandal. Wall Street titan defends Bronx family amid schoolyard fight. Investors question Reed's judgment. Jonathan's phone buzzed non-stop. Messages from lawyers, investors, and board members flooded in. Some were clipped and professional. Others were alarmist, bordering on panicked. But the underlying tone was the same. Fix this, or you're finished. He turned away from the glass, his jaw tight. Across his desk lay a neatly stacked pile of newspapers. The New York Times ran a feature in its Metro section. "When Billionaire Meets the Bronx, the Unlikely Friendship of Jonathan Reed and the Morales Family." The article recounted the playground incident, quoting an unnamed parent. "It's concerning to see a CEO of such stature entangled with a single mother from the Bronx. Nepotism at its finest." The Wall Street Journal was harsher. "Reed's distraction. Is the CEO focused on family drama over fiduciary duty?" Jonathan didn't have to read further. He knew how these stories worked. Rumor became narrative. Narrative became fact. And fact became market reaction. The office door burst open. Richard Blackwell strode in, his silver hair gleaming, his expression thunderous. He dropped a folder onto Jonathan's desk with a thud. 5%, Jonathan, Richard snapped. 5. Do you know what that means? $2 billion in market value wiped in a morning. Jonathan kept his tone calm. Markets recover. Richard leaned forward, his voice low and venomous. This isn't just about markets. It's about you. You've made yourself the headline, and not in a way that inspires confidence. Jonathan met his gaze evenly. My daughter defended a friend. I defended her, that's all. Richard scoffed. Don't be naive. You didn't just defend your daughter. You defended a boy from the Bronx whose mother works here because you put her here. Now the world thinks you're entangled with a single mother. Gossip is one thing. Scandal is another. Jonathan's jaw tightened. Isabel is an employee, a good one, and Ethan... His voice cracked before he steadied it. Ethan gave Lily back her voice. That matters more than market value. Richard slammed his palm on the desk. Not to the board. They've called an emergency session 3 hours from now. You'll walk in and give them one of two things, Isabel's resignation or yours. The ultimatum hung heavy in the air. Jonathan said nothing. He only stared out the window as Richard stormed out, muttering curses under his breath. The emergency board meeting convened in Reed Global's glass-walled conference room. The city skyline stretched behind them, a glittering jury. The directors filed in, men and women in tailored suits, each carrying an aura of power and calculation. Richard sat at the head, his expression grim. Jonathan took his seat opposite him. He felt their eyes on him, probing, judging, already leaning toward the verdict. Jonathan, Richard began smoothly, we're here because of the crisis you've created. Reed Global has lost billions in shareholder value. Our reputation is under attack. And all because of this. He slid a tabloid across the table. The headline screamed, From Wall Street to Welfare, the CEO and the Single Mom. Jonathan's eyes flicked over the photos. Grainy images of him with Lily and Ethan outside PS 87. Isabel exiting Reed Global's lobby, Lily clutching Ethan's hand. This is reckless, Richard continued. We can't afford the appearance of impropriety. The solution is simple. Terminate Isabel Morales' employment. Issue a statement distancing yourself and the company from this entanglement. Jonathan looked around the table. A few directors nodded. Others avoided his gaze. One woman spoke hesitantly. Jonathan, we respect your grief and your devotion to your daughter. But perception is everything. The longer this lingers, the more damage it does. Jonathan exhaled slowly, his hands clenched into fists beneath the table. He thought of Lily's fragile voice saying, "He gave me back my voice." He thought of Isabel's defiance, her refusal of pity, her demand for dignity. No, Jonathan said finally, his voice calm but resolute. A murmur rippled through the room. Richard narrowed his eyes. Excuse me? No, Jonathan repeated. I will not fire Isabel Morales. She's earned her position, and more importantly, she and her son are the reason my daughter is speaking again. That is not a liability. That is a miracle. Richard slammed his pen onto the table. Then you're choosing them over us, over your company, over everything you've built. Jonathan's gaze hardened. I'm choosing what's right. The room fell into tense silence. Finally, Richard leaned back, his lips curling into a cold smile. Then perhaps you should prepare to step down, because the board won't protect you from the fallout. That evening, Jonathan sat alone in his penthouse study. The city glowed outside, indifferent to his turmoil. His phone buzzed with a new message. He opened it, expecting another threat from Richard or a demand from legal counsel. But it was from Isabel. Mr. Reed, I'll resign tomorrow. Please don't put yourself or Lily through more of this. Ethan and I will be fine. Just protect your daughter." Jonathan stared at the message, his chest tightening. She was trying to save him by sacrificing herself. He closed his eyes, pressing the phone to his forehead. He thought of Sarah, her laughter echoing in memory. He thought of Lily, whispering tomorrow with fragile hope. He thought of Ethan, standing tall despite insults, giving voice to a girl who had none. Jonathan typed back, his fingers trembling. "No, you will not resign. Tomorrow I'll speak, and I'll make sure the world knows the truth." He set the phone down, his decision solidifying like steel. For once, Jonathan Reed, master of mergers and markets, wasn't playing to win. He was playing to protect what truly mattered. And tomorrow, the storm would no longer terrify him. It would test him. The conference room at Midtown Manhattan's Hilton Hotel had never felt so claustrophobic. Rows of journalists packed the space wall to wall, cameras flashing like a storm, microphones sprouting from stands at the front podium. The hum of whispered speculation filled the air. Jonathan Reed stood behind the curtain, waiting for his cue. His palms felt damp, though he had delivered hundreds of speeches in his career, quarterly earnings reports, product launches, keynote addresses to packed auditoriums. But this was different. This was not about market growth or shareholder returns. This was about his daughter, about Ethan Morales, about Isabel, about truth. And the truth was messy. "Are you sure about this?" Emily, his assistant, whispered beside him. Her voice trembled. "The board didn't authorize a statement." Richard will do what Richard always does," Jonathan cut her off, his tone steady. "This time, I'm not speaking for him or the board or the company. I'm speaking as a father." Emily hesitated, then nodded. She stepped back as the moderator announced, "Please welcome Jonathan Reed, CEO of Reed Global." Applause didn't greet him, only the thunder of camera shutters and the rustle of notepads. Jonathan walked to the podium, the lights hot against his face, the murmur of reporters surging like a tide. He paused, gripping the edges of the lectern, grounding himself. Behind his eyes flashed images. Lily, silent in her car seat after the accident. Lily clutching her rabbit in therapy offices. Lily laughing beside Ethan in the library. Lily shouting in the playground, "He gave me back my voice!" Jonathan drew a breath. His voice, when it came, was low but firm. 3 years ago, my daughter Lily lost her voice. After the sudden death of her mother, she retreated into silence. Every specialist told me she might never speak again. I am a man with resources, with access to the best medicine, the best therapies, but nothing worked. For 3 years, I spoke to my child and heard nothing in return. The room grew still. Reporters leaned forward, pens poised. Then, Jonathan continued, his eyes steady, a boy from the Bronx named Ethan Morales changed everything. In one afternoon, he reached my daughter where no one else could. He gave her back her words. He gave her back her laughter. He gave her back her life. He paused, letting the words settle. The flashes slowed. The silence was almost reverent. "I've heard the rumors," Jonathan said, his voice tightening. "I've seen the headlines. They call Ethan trash from the Bronx. They say his mother, Isabel, doesn't belong at Reed Global, that she's here because of favoritism, because of me. Let me tell you the truth. Isabel Morales was once a nursing student. Life forced her to choose survival over a diploma. But she is strong, capable, compassionate, and she has more integrity than many of the men I've shared boardrooms with. She deserves her position. She has earned her place, not through pity, not through scandal, but through perseverance." The room buzzed, reporters scribbling furiously, Hands shot up. "Mr. Reed," one journalist shouted, "are you confirming a personal relationship with Ms. Morales?" Jonathan looked directly into the camera lenses. "What I am confirming is this. I will not apologize for my daughter's healing. I will not apologize for standing beside a boy who gave her voice back. And I will not apologize for giving a woman like Isabel the chance she was denied years ago. If that costs me my career, so be it. I will not trade my daughter's laughter for your approval." The words fell like a hammer. For a moment there was silence. Then chaos erupted. Questions fired from every corner. "Are you stepping down as CEO? Did the board approve this program? Will Reed Global recover from this?" Jonathan raised a hand, commanding the room. "This isn't about corporate strategy. This is about humanity. My daughter found her voice because of friendship, not wealth. Because of kindness, not medicine. That is the story here. If you can't see that, then I don't care what headline you print tomorrow." He stepped away from the podium, ignoring the shouts that followed. The cameras tracked him as he walked out, shoulders straight, expression unyielding. Backstage, Emily caught up with him, her face pale. "That was... Jonathan, that was career suicide." "Maybe," he said, loosening his tie. "Or maybe it was the first honest thing I've done in years." His phone buzzed. A message from Richard Blackwell appeared on the screen. "You've doomed yourself. The board will convene tonight. Expect consequences." Jonathan slid the phone into his pocket without replying. By evening, the internet had exploded. Clips of his speech spread across Twitter, TikTok, Facebook. On finance channels, analysts debated his judgment, his future. Stock tickers scrolled red. But elsewhere, on parenting blogs, on community pages, on advocacy forums, the reaction was different. A CEO who admits money couldn't save his daughter? That's real. Finally, someone using their platform to highlight trauma kid's face? This is the kind of leadership we need. Jonathan sat in his living room, Lily curled against him, watching cartoons. His laptop glowed with article after article, half condemned him, half praised him. The war had begun. The doorbell rang. Isabel stood outside, Ethan beside her. Her face was pale, her eyes stormy. "Why did you do that?" she demanded the moment he opened the door. Jonathan blinked. "Because it was the truth." "You just put a target on my back," she snapped. "On Ethan's back. Do you know how cruel this city can be? They'll drag us through the mud just to hurt you." Jonathan's voice softened. "I know, and I'm sorry. But I couldn't let them reduce you to gossip. You're more than that. Ethan is more than that." Isabel's eyes flickered, torn between anger and gratitude. Ethan tugged at her sleeve. "Mom," he whispered. "Lily's smiling." They turned. Lily sat on the couch, her rabbit on her lap, grinning at the sight of Ethan. For a moment, the storm outside didn't matter. Jonathan met Isabel's gaze. "Whatever happens next, we face it together. Not as CEO and employee, not as charity case and benefactor, but as parents who want the same thing, a future where our children can laugh without fear." For the first time, Isabel didn't argue. She only nodded faintly, her eyes glistening. The next morning, Reed Global's stock fell another 3%. Headlines screamed of turmoil. Richard Blackwell moved swiftly, calling for Jonathan's resignation. But at the same time, something unexpected began to happen. Letters flooded the company inbox. Emails arrived by the thousands. Parents of children with selective mutism, trauma survivors, nonprofit leaders, all writing to thank Jonathan for telling their story. One message in particular stood out. "My daughter hasn't spoken since her brother died in a fire. For the first time," she pointed at the screen last night and whispered, "Me." Thank you for reminding us we're not alone." Jonathan read the letter aloud at breakfast. Isabel listened, her hand resting on Ethan's shoulder. Lily looked up at him, her hazel eyes bright. The world outside was in uproar. The board was sharpening its knives. But in that moment, Jonathan knew. The storm wasn't destroying him. It was redefining him. And tomorrow, when he walked into that boardroom, he would no longer walk as a CEO chained to reputation. He would walk as a father unafraid to fight for his daughter's voice. The boardroom of Reed Global felt colder than usual that night. The glass walls looked out over Manhattan's glittering skyline, but Jonathan barely noticed. He sat alone at the long table, waiting for the directors to file in. The press conference had already triggered an earthquake, and tonight the board would decide whether to remove him. But Jonathan's mind wasn't on shareholders or stock prices. It was on a single sentence his daughter had whispered to Ethan that afternoon after school. "We're broken, but we fixed each other." He had heard it with his own ears. The sentence was small, fragile, but it carried a truth larger than any market report. Lily was speaking again, not because of therapy or money, but because of Ethan Morales. And Jonathan had begun to realize there was something more, something in Ethan's past that mirrored Lily's silence. Earlier that week, Jonathan had taken Ethan and Lily to a follow-up appointment at Mount Sinai, where Lily's therapist, Dr. Abrams, observed her progress. The doctor had been astonished at the strides she'd made, stringing together sentences after years of mutism. "This is remarkable," Dr. Abrams said, jotting notes. "Jonathan, you must understand, cases of selective mutism rarely resolve this quickly. Something profound has shifted in her environment." Jonathan looked at Ethan, who sat beside Lily with a quiet smile. "It's him," Jonathan said simply. Dr. Abrams hesitated. "Has Ethan ever had issues with speech himself?" Jonathan frowned. "What do you mean?" The doctor leaned forward. "Children who unlock another child's voice often recognize the silence. They've lived it." Jonathan's heart skipped. Later, when Ethan excused himself to the restroom, Jonathan asked Isabel. Her eyes lowered. "Yes. He was 5. He watched his father fall from scaffolding at a construction site. It was instant. After that, Ethan didn't speak for nearly a year. Not a word." Jonathan felt the weight of her words settle deep in his chest. So that was the connection. Shared silence, shared trauma. Ethan hadn't just befriended Lily. He understood her, because he had been her. Now, in the sterile boardroom, Jonathan gripped the table, his resolve hardening. The directors filed in, their faces grim. Richard Blackwell sat at the head, his expression carved from stone. "We've reviewed the situation," Richard began, his voice cool. "Your press conference has plunged us further into crisis. Shareholders are restless. The media won't relent. We have 2 options. You resign gracefully, or we vote to remove you." Jonathan rose slowly. His voice, when it came, was steady. "You can take my title. You can take my office, but you will not take my integrity." The room murmured, unsettled. "You want to know why I defended Isabel and Ethan?" Jonathan continued. "Because they saved my daughter. Not metaphorically, literally. Lily had been silent for 3 years. She had no voice. And Ethan, a boy you call a distraction, gave it back to her. Why? Because he understood. He had lost his voice once too. They share a silence none of you can imagine." Richard's lip curled. "Touching. But this is not a charity. This is a corporation. Empathy does not pay dividends." Jonathan leaned forward, eyes blazing. "Neither does cowardice." Gasps echoed across the table. Richard's face reddened, but Jonathan pressed on. You think I'm distracted. I'm not. I'm awake. For too long, I measured success in profit margins. But what's the point of building towers of glass if you let children live voiceless in their shadows? I won't abandon them. If that means you strip my title, so be it. But know this, you're not just losing a CEO. You're losing a leader who finally remembered what leadership means. The board fell into uneasy silence. No vote was cast that night. The directors adjourned, muttering, avoiding Jonathan's gaze. Richard stormed out, his fury unmasked. Jonathan sank back into his chair, exhausted but unbroken. Later, he drove north, past the Harlem River, back to the Bronx. Isabel had texted earlier, "Come by, the kids want to see you." When he arrived, Ethan and Lily were sitting on the floor of the Morales apartment, building castles out of cardboard boxes. Their laughter echoed against peeling wallpaper, brighter than any chandelier. "Daddy!" Lily exclaimed, her voice clear, strong. Jonathan froze, tears burning his eyes. She hadn't called him that in years, not since Sarah's death. Ethan looked up, his smile shy but proud. Jonathan knelt, pulling Lily close. "I heard what you said earlier," he whispered. "We're broken." "But we fixed each other. Where did you learn that?" Lily glanced at Ethan. He shrugged. "That's what I told her. About me. About when I couldn't talk after my dad." His voice trailed. Jonathan placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Ethan." Ethan shook his head. "It's okay. I think I stayed quiet because I thought words wouldn't bring him back. But then one day I realized maybe words could help someone else." He looked at Lily, his expression earnest. "That's why I read stories, so no one feels as lonely as I did." Jonathan's throat tightened. This boy, this child who had known grief too early, had become the bridge that healed his daughter. He looked at Isabel, who stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, her eyes glistening. "You've raised an extraordinary son," Jonathan said softly. Her lips trembled. "I just tried to keep him alive. He did the rest." Jonathan turned back to the children. "Then maybe it's time we build something bigger. Not just for Lily and Ethan, for every child like them." Isabel tilted her head. "What do you mean?" Jonathan rose, his voice firm. "A center. A place for children who've lost their voices, through grief, through trauma, through pain. Therapy, art, storytelling. A place where silence becomes healing, not punishment. We'll call it the Sarah Reed Healing Center in honor of my wife. Her memory deserves that, and so do these kids." For a moment, the room was silent. Then Isabel stepped closer. "Jonathan, are you sure? This will only make the board angrier." Jonathan smiled faintly. "Let them be angry. For the first time, I'm not serving them. I'm serving something real." Ethan grinned. Lily squeezed his hand, her voice trembling but determined. "I'll help," she said. Jonathan's heart swelled. That night, as he left the Bronx and drove back toward Manhattan, he felt a peace he hadn't known in years. For once, the path ahead was not dictated by stock tickers or shareholder votes. It was dictated by the laughter of two children who had found each other in the ruins of silence. And Jonathan Reed knew, whatever storms lay ahead, they would weather them together. The morning of the opening ceremony dawned crisp and bright, a rare gift in New York City's late autumn. Sunlight streamed across the newly restored brick facade of the Sarah Reed Healing Center, casting a golden glow on its fresh white letters. Where once an abandoned school had stood in the Bronx, now stretched a vibrant space painted with murals of children holding kites, their voices represented by bright ribbons swirling upward into a sky of colors. Jonathan Reed stood at the entrance, his hands clasped behind his back. He wore no tailored Armani suit today, only a simple navy blazer, white shirt, and the nervous pride of a man who had finally built something not measured in quarterly earnings, but in hope. Beside him, Isabel adjusted the microphone at the podium. Her nameplate already read Director of Wellness Programs, Sarah Reed Healing Center. She wore a modest dress, her dark hair framing a face that carried both strength and humility. Years of exhaustion had left their marks, but today those marks glowed like medals of survival. Jonathan glanced down at the two children standing together at the foot of the stage. Lily wore a pale blue dress, her stuffed rabbit tucked safely in her bag. Ethan stood proudly in a crisp shirt and hand-me-down tie Isabel had ironed that morning. Their fingers were intertwined, their smiles radiant. Jonathan's heart clenched at the sight. Sarah, he thought, look at them. Look at what your memory built. The crowd began to settle. Reporters, city officials, local families, and even skeptical Wall Street figures had gathered. The press cameras whirred, ready to capture either triumph or failure. Jonathan no longer cared which. He stepped to the podium. 3 years ago, he began, his voice carrying steady across the crowd. My daughter lost her voice. For 3 years, I lived in silence with her. I tried everything money could buy. It wasn't enough. And then one day, in Central Park, a boy from the Bronx named Ethan Morales looked at her and said, "Want to play?" In that moment, my daughter spoke again. One word, her own name, Lily. Gasps rippled through the audience. Jonathan continued. That boy understood her silence because he had lived it himself. He too had lost his voice after tragedy, and in finding each other, they healed each other. That is why we are here today. Because there are thousands of children like them. Children whose silence hides pain, whose voices are waiting to be heard. This center exists for them. Applause erupted. Jonathan's throat tightened, but he pressed on. This isn't just my legacy. It belongs to Ethan and Lily, who proved that healing doesn't come from power or wealth, but from compassion. It belongs to Isabel, who refused to accept pity and demanded dignity. And it belongs to every parent who has watched a child suffer and prayed for a miracle. He stepped back, gesturing to Isabel. She took the podium, her hands steady. Thank you, Mr. Reed, she said. Then her voice grew stronger. I stand here not as a CEO, not as someone with privilege, but as a single mother who almost lost everything. For years, I worked 3 jobs, begging landlords for time, watching my son fall asleep on library books because it was safer there than in the streets. I know what it means to be unseen. That is why this center matters, because every child deserves to be seen. Every voice deserves to be heard. Tears shimmered in her eyes, but her words rang clear. Applause swelled again, longer, louder. Then it was the children's turn. Ethan stepped forward, clutching Lily's hand, and he held a book. The Dragon Was Just Lonely. Together they read aloud to the audience. Ethan began, his voice confident. Lily followed, her words careful but unbroken. When they reached the line, "The dragon was just lonely," Lily lifted her head, her voice carrying across the courtyard with unexpected clarity. The crowd stilled. Dozens of parents wiped tears from their eyes. Jonathan felt his knees weaken, but pride steadied him. When the ribbon was cut, the doors of the healing center opened, revealing colorful classrooms, therapy rooms filled with toys, walls lined with children's art. Already, families stepped inside, children tugging at their parents' hands, curious, hopeful. The ceremony ended, but Jonathan lingered in the courtyard. Richard Blackwell had attended, reluctantly no doubt, but instead of anger, his face held something closer to resignation. He approached Jonathan, his tone softer than it had been in months. "You've lost the company, Jonathan," Richard said. "The board will vote you out by year's end." Jonathan nodded. "I know." Richard hesitated, then added, "But you may have built something greater." For once there was no malice in his eyes. He extended his hand. Jonathan shook it, surprised by the weight of unspoken respect. When Richard left, Isabel approached, Ethan skipping ahead to join Lily among the children inside. She looked at Jonathan, her voice quiet. "You risked everything," she said. Jonathan shook his head. "No. I gained everything." Her lips curved into a faint smile. "You don't regret it?" He looked at the children through the glass doors, Lily laughing, Ethan holding her rabbit, both surrounded by new friends. "Not for a second," he whispered. That evening, after the crowds dispersed, the four of them remained in the Healing Center's garden. It was a small green space, framed by benches and blooming hydrangeas, designed as a memorial for Sarah. A plaque stood in the center, "For Sarah Reed, whose love taught us that silence can be healed by kindness." They sat around a wooden picnic table. Jonathan unpacked sandwiches. Isabel poured lemonade from a thermos. The children ran through the garden, chasing each other, their laughter echoing against the brick walls. Lily paused, picking a flower. She walked back, placing it gently on the plaque. "For Mommy," she whispered. Her voice was soft but clear. Jonathan's breath caught. He pulled her into his arms, tears slipping free. Ethan joined, resting a hand on her shoulder. Isabel sat beside them, her presence steady, anchoring. In that moment, Jonathan realized the truth he had fought so long to ignore. Family was not about bloodlines or boardrooms. It was about choice, about choosing to stand together, to heal together, to build together. He looked at Isabel, at Ethan, at Lily. His voice trembled but carried the weight of certainty. "We are a family," he said. "Not by birth, not by wealth, but by choice. And nothing, no headline, no board vote can take that from us." Isabel's eyes shone with unshed tears. She reached across the table, her hand brushing his. For the first time, she didn't pull away. The children returned, breathless with laughter, collapsing onto the bench between them. Lily leaned against Jonathan, Ethan against Isabel, their heads touching. The sunset cast the courtyard in golden light, painting their small circle with warmth. Jonathan closed his eyes, listening to the sound he had once feared he would never hear again, his daughter's voice mingling with laughter. It was the sound of healing, the sound of legacy, the sound of home. Thank you for walking with us until the very last page of this journey. You have seen a little girl find her voice again, a boy from the Bronx heal through kindness, a mother rediscover her dignity, and a father learn that true legacy is not measured in wealth, but in love chosen freely. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us. Subscribe so that together we can keep sharing tales of hope, redemption, and families built not by blood, but by courage and compassion. Because in the end, we are all searching for the same fire, a place where silence is healed, where laughter is safe, and where love is chosen every single day. Thank you for being part of this family.